Hello and welcome everyone from wherever you are listening to this podcast. A massive thank you to everyone who has been listening and welcome to all new listeners. I will very kindly ask to make sure that everyone leaves a rating or a comment on wherever you get your podcast from. It's really greatly appreciated and it's free to do so. So following the global pandemic, a land war between Russia and Ukraine, fuel and fertilizer shortages, supply chain disruptions and worldwide inflation, the importance of food security has never been more in the spotlight for the public eye. In today's topic of discussion, we're going to dive into the first critical piece of the puzzle, the relationship between population growth and food demand. So to kick things off, what do we mean by food security? Well, the World Food Summit of 1996 has very kindly given us a definition, and this is whereby when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So do you think we live in a food secure world? You think of where you are sitting right now, wherever you may be. Do you have access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food to meet your dietary needs? Can you get access to all your food preferences within a reasonable distance? And can you have the ability to live an active and healthy life? Well, the Global Food Security Index then of 2020 released a report, and within that report it stated that 1 in 10 people are affected by severe food insecurity, and 2 billion people lack the resources to nutritious and sufficient food supply. Those are quite astounding numbers, especially in this day and age. Most of the undernourished people then are facing daily food insecurity issues, which live in developing economies, and for some of these regions there has been an increase in the number of people suffering from low levels of food insecurity. So the question of population growth then has long related to the topic of food security. Since sort of the 1960s, global growth in agricultural production has outpaced population increase. However, this success has come at high cost. For example, firstly, food systems are already exceeding some planetary boundaries for key resources and are generating tremendous food loss and waste. You think of our oceans are being overfished. The population of fish can't be sustained. Secondly, current diets are resulting in premature mortality and susceptibility to both chronic and infectious diseases. An example there I can think of is sort of rice production. Rice production is, it's grown under anaerobic conditions, meaning it's grown underwater. That water is contaminated with arsenic. 2 billion people live off rice as their stable diet, so if they're eating arsenic contaminated rice, then these here will only cause chronic illnesses for a severe amount of population. Thirdly, then, food systems continue to be linked with vast inequalities across the world, including the persistence of hunger and food insecurity and the struggle for decent livelihoods by workers across food production. So these three things in mind, then, with the population expected to be 10 billion by 2050, and even larger numbers projected by the end of the century, food security is only going to become an even greater problem, particularly in those growing economies, which are mainly located in our sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and parts of Latin America then as well. Food production actually accounts for around 50% of the Earth's habitable land. So all the land on the Earth, 50% of it is kind of accounted towards some sort of food production. Food production then is accounts for about 25% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and that would mainly be actually probably methane produced. And we will talk about that in a separate episode. Therefore, basically, food production is a major driver for biodiversity loss, air and water pollution, deforestation, soil degradation, antibiotic resistance, bacteria, and water scarcity. If you think of the Amazon rainforest, it's a massive topic, and it has been for a few decades now, about how it's being deforested. You can't really get rules and regulations in. All those habitats are being lost because the forest is being burnt down to allow for fertile land to then grow crops. Soya is one of your biggest crops grown in sort of South America. A lot of Europe can't actually grow soya because of the climate and conditions that it takes to actually grow soya, particularly here in the UK. Soya is very, very hard to grow. So it's all imported. It's because it's then sort of a limited crop. It'll be then known as a cash crop. So it's worth a lot of money to those that are deforesting the Amazon rainforest. So it's a big problem that's out there and it needs to be addressed, and it's really only going to be done through collaboration of nations. Food loss then is also a big problem. Food loss and waste is amount to about 25 to 30% of the total production. So you think if you in your house right now or wherever you are, if you go to a cafe, if you go to a restaurant, 25 to 30% of the food that you can see in front of you will be put to food waste. And that's a massive number considering the demand we have for food, and all those that are malnourished or go and are in a hunger state every day. And then this food waste actually accounts then for about 8 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. And that's kind of because whenever food waste goes to landfill, once it starts to decompose, it then actually releases sort of nitrous oxide and methane off into the atmosphere, which is a natural process. But if we can limit and reduce that number of food waste, then that greenhouse gas emission percentage then does reduce. There's that relationship between it all. Climate change already affects food security through changing precipitation patterns and an increase in frequency of extreme weather events such as heat waves, floods and droughts. I can only put into perspective that here in Northern Ireland in the last sort of 12 to 15 months we have had a lot of rain, a lot more rain than we are used to. Northern Ireland and Ireland as a whole is very it's a rainy nation. Everybody knows that it rains a lot here, but the levels of rain that we have been experiencing has been like none before, and this then has an impact on food production. Particularly for crops, we haven't been able to get crops in on time, which then reduces yield whenever it comes to harvest, which then limits the amount of crop that there is and sellable good at the end, so the farmer loses out. But then those are the supermarkets then need to charge higher for breads, any type of cereal, because the supply just isn't there for the demand. And then again, these extreme weather patterns really affect those low and middle income countries where many people depend on agriculture for their livelihoods and where food security and adaptive capacity are low. And, mainly that is due to sort of government control and government policies and investment into the country. Here in the United Kingdom, we're very lucky that if a natural disaster did happen or an extreme weather event, government will provide a subsidy, government will help financially to get things back up and running, whereas sort of in those low and middle income countries, this could be very hard. So why is there going to be an increase in food demands? We've kind of touched on some of it, but just to kind of bring a broader aspect to it, sort of an increase in calorie intake. So as incomes rise, people tend to consume more calories and diversify their diets, meaning more food is needed. More people will have more disposable income to spend on nutrient-dense foodstuffs such as meat, which in many cultures and within history can be seen as a sign of wealth. This then kind of creates a dietary change then, a shift towards higher consumption of meat, dairy and processed foods by about 60 to 70% in developing countries as their economies grow over the next few decades. And this can all then be known as a nutritional transition. So there's a key definition there, that it's a transition and a shift in what is consumed by that nation. In terms of food production requirement then, to kind of meet all these demands of an extra 2 billion people on the earth, experts within the field of sustainable food production are estimating and have current estimations of between 60 to 70% increase in food production is needed to meet the demands for the expected population by 2050. What will we need this? What will this need to be by the end of the century then? By 2100, what will this increase need to be? And again, remember, they don't make land anymore, so there's a need for sustainable intensification. More land gets taken out every year due to housing or conservation and preservation of that environment, so that's taken out of food production. So there's a real need for sustainable intensification. So what do we mean by sustainable intensification? Well, Traditionally intensification looks at increasing yields per unit of land, whether that be acre or hectare. So that's about increasing the intensity per unit of land area, which really means being able to have, for example, 10 animals graze 1 acre rather than 5, which will be due to, improvements in grass genetics, improvements in grazing management, maximising the soil health to grow the optimum amount of grass possible. So there's a lot of different factors to consider when you talk about sustainable intensification. However, then over time, intensification kind of disregarded the environmental aspect of farming and purely focused on economic return and viability. And then this here has brought its own challenges, and that's kind of where then loss of biodiversity has come into it. Stretching the boundaries of the Earth's natural resource capacity already has come from the intensification of food production. But there was that need because after the Second World War, with so many displaced people around the world, there was an extreme need and understanding between nations that food just had to be produced from everywhere possible. Food needed to be grown, cultivated to try and feed the population. So therefore, sustainable intensification looks at a process or system where yields are maintained or increased without adverse environmental impact and without the conversion of more land. So basically, to sum it all up, we need to produce more output from what we already have. And this is a daunting challenge, but we have to look at previous production increases over the decades. So if we look at previous, increases in production per animal, if we look at a typical dairy cow back in the 1950s, 1960s, produced maybe 2,500 litres of milk a year. Roughly, a dairy cow now can produce between 9 and 10,000 litres or more, depending on genetics and how the herd is managed by the farmer. So basically, one cow today is the equivalent of 3 cows 70 years ago. And where will that be then by the end of the century? Will 1 cow or will 3 cows today be equivalent to 1 cow by the end of the century? That's the kind of the exponential curve that we're looking at. In terms of pigs then, litter sizes, there's been about a 50% increase in the average litter size of pigs, meaning that, in the 50s and 60s, if it was maybe 8 piglets per litter, you're looking at 15, 16 piglets now, so you're doubling that output, doubling that capacity of that animal. Meaning then that more pork, more meat can be produced from one sow every year. Kind of the target that farmers would go for is a 2-ton pig, where that sow, will be able to produce 2 ton of consumable meat within a year. And you have, say, even 1 million pigs. That's a lot of pork. And for the same for broiler chickens. And what do we mean by broiler chickens? You have laying hens and you've got broiler hens. Laying hens obviously are for eggs. Broiler chickens then are for meat, so meat consumption. And here's a fun fact actually: a broiler hen and a broiler chicken only lives for about 6 weeks. That's its lifespan. So it's fast turnaround. It meets its optimum meat production at about 6 weeks. So it's very fast. It's how you could feed a lot of people in a very short period of time. So those are some of the possible solutions. One of the main possible solutions is sustainable intensification, which many countries, many nations are trying to strive for at the minute. But it's just very hard to get the rules and regulations, government input on that. Another sort of aspect then for increasing production and optimizing production then is sort of technology and innovation use for farms to use daily. One of the specific innovation kind of concepts is precision agricultural technologies, which play a large role in the ability to sort of optimize the use of inputs during crop production and growth stages then. So for example, the application of fertilizers. Fertilizer is a severe input costs for any farm, and particularly since the Russian and Ukraine war, fertilizer prices skyrocketed. They went up by about 3 times the cost. So being able to use precision GPS and fertilizer specific for a field or a particular soil, will maximise then the nutrient use, which will promote healthier soils and in turn should increase those capacity of those fields. So that would be sort of the innovative concept as I already sort of discussed. And then the technology then that has been produced from this concept would be a variable rate application spreader, which there are many companies out there sort of creating these technologies, which will then accurately release the current amount of or the correct amount of nutrient to the targeted soil using data then that has been collected through a soil sample. Therefore, sort of precision agriculture is trying to move farming away from that one-size-fits-all strategy and move to a more specific agricultural production to again optimize resource efficiency. That is kind of a brief introduction to global food demand and food security. I want to thank you for listening and say join us next time on Harvest Your Knowledge as we explore methods to reduce methane production from ruminant animals to help alleviate environmental concerns of livestock production. Don't forget to leave a like or rating on whichever platform you are listening on, and please do share your thoughts on today's episode. Bye for now.